Welcome to Dear Frannie. I am your host, Catherine LeBlanc, fractional CMO and founder at Franchise Fractionals. I am joined by a powerhouse team today to tackle some really interesting leadership questions. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and I'll start with Scott.
Hey everyone, I'm Scott Abbott, one of the founders of 5-Star Painting and CEO of 5-Star Franchising, a holding company of 6 home service brands.
Well, welcome to the show, Scott. And Chad?
I'm Chad Jones. I'm also a co-founder at 5-Star Franchising with Scott, and I've been a business partner with Scott for almost 20 years now.
That's a long-term relationship. I won't ask about your marriages, see how that has been faring with this partnership. But let's jump into our episode today. As always, we're going to start with our hot takes. These are interesting things happening in franchising. I'm excited to hear what Chad has to say about franchising today.
Oh, thanks. I like this hot tech idea. Maybe it's me getting mad or something like that. But I think we listen to our franchisees a little bit too much. How's that for a hot take?
That is a hot take.
That sometimes we let them run the ship, and they're not really qualified to do that. We said a lot. So I'm not sure if you want to go a little deeper and vent a little more, or if that's good.
Well, I'm curious. So where, because I hear what you're saying, and I think that creating lanes to provide franchisees with a lane to give feedback is important. And so when you're thinking about getting that feedback from franchisees, where do you want the feedback, and where is it like, okay, but we're the experts, and so we're going to own this? That's
exactly right. Like, I think, Canton, we have to hear from our franchisees, and we want to hear from franchisees. We want to know how they're doing. We want to know their pitfalls. We want to know their struggles. We want to know what's working and what's not working from their vantage point. That's super important. I think there's different ways we can do that. I think there's surveys, there's like FBRs, and there's other kind of NPSs that we can do with the franchisees. I also think that obviously having your business development coaches and those teams talking to franchisees is super important, and that feedback can be valuable. But I do worry that sometimes we make educated decisions based on what franchisees' feedback is coming back to us with, and it may not be formed in data, formed in numbers, or formed in sometimes the full reality. It's definitely formed in their reality, right? Their perception is their reality. But does that really mean like what's happening globally in the franchise brand, or in the global economy per se? So I think that sometimes we actually go too far trying to appease, and I always worry that like maybe sometimes we're trying to be their friends as opposed to their business partner, their franchise partner in this.
Yeah, and I've been in situations where especially I'm in marketing, right? And so marketing is so subjective. Everyone's an expert. Everybody's seen an advertisement, and so they kind of know everything there is to know about advertising and targeting. And they're with franchisees, I often find that they are putting themselves in the shoes of their guest, but not in a way that they think they are their only guest, right? So they look at things through a focus group of one versus really understanding things from a guest first perspective. And so I try and combat that with data and with research to say, okay, this is how your guests feel. But even then, those emotions and, I don't like this picture. It happens a lot in marketing, if you can believe it. But it is hard to balance the emotional, because you want your franchisees to be passionate and emotional about their business with what is right for the brand and how to move it forward. And those can be some difficult conversations.
Yeah, like you want them to be like passionate about their business, but you also want their business to succeed too, and you want their business to thrive. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we hear a lot about responsible franchising, and I think ultimately responsible franchising is helping these franchisees succeed. Mm-hmm. And so we need to do that with very clear data and understanding. Sometimes we have to go ski over the tips a little bit and our directions, but those should always be formed in data. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe another hot take is that most franchisors probably know the franchisees' data better than themselves. Mm-hmm. And we look at it, right? Whereas we probably maybe even have more time to look at it than they do. They're busy, and we get that, especially in home services where we play. they're running the show, they're doing all these different things. Sometimes they're talking with the customers as well too. But the data is clearly the most important thing to be looking at. And so we had to remember that we have that stewardship over helping them succeed, and the data is going to help them do that. And so we just have to always be careful in what we're listening to. We don't want to make the right decisions. I know I was talking with a brand president just yesterday, and he was telling me that he was talking with one of his franchisees, and his franchisee said, "We're back in 2008 again." Yep. I don't know if that's true or not based on the data, but to that perception to that franchisee is, well, if we make decisions based on that, we're probably doing a misservice to him.
Right. Yes. And Scott, what do you think?
I think my hot take would be to stop franchising things that don't work. Chad mentioned responsible franchising. I think this conversation is coming up because you're seeing some brands scale outrageously quick because the model affords that ability, and it helps people. It's one of the most efficient structures, allow people to get into entrepreneurship and business ownership. Mm-hmm. So we love the model, right? It's one of America's greatest inventions. But the reality is there are some people who turn to franchising as a means to make money, mm-hmm. because their model they have themselves isn't really a great source of income for them. And so they just see, well, if I grew bigger and we added more locations, then it'll be better for me. And they haven't really nailed it, and yet they're scaling it. And so it causes challenges in the industry. We're seeing that come up right now with certain regulation changes that people are looking at doing, or the government's looking at doing around franchising, that really come from the fact that you've had some really rapid expansions of some concepts and they weren't really ready to expand yet.
Do you think that, because I can see this in two things. One, I believe that we do rush to franchise without solid proof of concept. And I think that kind of solid proof of concept can vary based on what the franchise is, but at the very least, you want a couple of locations that are performing well. Franchising based on one location performing well, where it's the owner, operator, inventor of the franchise, is not a good model for, is this going to scale for franchisees? And so there's that issue. And then I see the other issue of these brands that expand so quickly that it does become it becomes a cash play, and they don't use that cash to support franchisees, which then causes an implosion. And I'm curious as to kind of are there other ways that this is breaking that you've seen, or
Well, I think the not to like pick on any particular brands, but I'll just speak to what I see happening. There's like trends and then there's fads, mm-hmm. right? So we saw I would call it a fad around frozen yogurt that got relived twice. It happened in the late 80s and early 90s. It was all the rave, and then it kind of disappeared, and then it came back. And so all these brands get involved into this fad of frozen yogurt that consumers are enjoying. And then there's a massive dilution because they expand so quickly that the demand isn't matching up with the supply. And you have all these people now who've committed to 10-year leases and have built out big stores and have, they've really bet their savings on something, mm-hmm. and that demand evaporated. We think we saw that with cupcakes about mm-hmm. 10 years ago. A bunch of concepts came on the scene. Cupcakes were all the rave. All of a sudden you see these things pop up, and yet it wasn't really a trend. It was a fad. Mm-hmm. And, you see with cookies, there's some brands out there that have just come out with lots of different cookie concepts, and the franchisees are seeing demand really decline. Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing that in the 19s of some of these concepts. And so I think the challenge is like consumers want a service or a product or an experience or, health and beauty and fitness and so forth. But how do you provide things that are lasting, and making sure that your concept you're building is a lasting concept, or that it finds the right model before you scale it and, add 800 locations only to find out you got to close 200 because you just grew too fast. That for me is, I'm a big believer in the fact that people should be coming to franchising because their probability of success improves and increases. Right. And so if franchising provides it to people, then we need to be providing concepts that actually can show and demonstrate a higher probability of success. And there's nothing wrong with a little patience before you add 400 units. I mean, you could add 50 units and still grow very nicely, mm-hmm. As we tend to do in a lot of our home service brands. and provide to people what they're looking for, which is a vehicle. I just had, Catherine, a couple on. I do a podcast every month called the Home Service Summit, and I had two owners come on. It's a married couple in our Gotcha Covered brand. And so I asked them how they found Gotcha Covered, and they started talking about how they got into the business. And I hope that everyone just realizes this is the case. It was a reminder for me. They both said, well, we had a broker approach us, and they showed us like 8 different concepts. And then we reviewed them all. We called the franchisees, and we just didn't fall in love with any of them. And so they get the next round of concepts, and Gotcha Covered was one of those franchise concepts, or windows and wall covering, or window and drapes covering concepts. And they said they called a bunch of the franchisees, and all the franchisees at Gotcha Covered were so happy with their purchase. Like, they did the most important thing, they validated.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, so I said, so you didn't want to be in like window coverings and blinds? And they said, no, I don't know anything about window coverings and blinds. Oh, so why did you buy a franchise in window covering and blinds? Well, we just were looking for a vehicle, and that was the vehicle we chose because the franchisees all validated, saying this is a great concept.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be reminded of that. Our responsibility as a franchisor is to provide a concept that is the vehicle for someone to get into business ownership and find some independence and financial independence and personal independence, and to get to where they want to get to. And if you remember that, then you build it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe most people aren't buying cupcake franchise concepts because they love cupcakes. They're buying because they want to get business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's make sure we're providing concepts that are lasting and can help them achieve their goals.
And it's so interesting to me because the home service space seems to be the most competitive space. I mean, and you could call restaurants the most competitive, but there's just so many ways that you can slice and dice that pie. But tell me then, with 5-star franchising, how do you ensure that what you're delivering to the franchisees is going to stand the test of time? How do are you developing proprietary processes?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You got it. Like we need to provide to franchisees what they could not do on their own, or if they did on their own would be cost prohibitive or time prohibitive, right? Mm-hmm. So they could create a website for themselves and spend the $250,000 to do it right. Or the franchisor can do that, and then we spread that price across the entire ad fund, right? Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, it's about value creation. How do we create value for franchisees where the royalty they pay and the ad fund they pay buys them things they could not get on their own and gives them an advantage over their competitors, which is a highly fragmented market. There's hundreds and hundreds of people in every line of service we offer across America in home services. So the lens by which we look at this is, how do we create value for franchisees by giving them things that they could not do on their own, or if they did on their own, it would be cost prohibitive or time prohibitive. And so to answer your question, we have a company called ProNexus. We call it our customer experience solution. It specializes in making sure that anytime a customer calls, phones, emails, texts, comes onto our website, we enable the process of scheduling or buying from our franchisees. And that is a very advanced, highly technological system that's integrated with CRMs and marketing tools that give them the data they need, that Chad was alluding to, giving the franchisees the data they need to make good decisions. And it's a big part of how we provide to franchisees value. In addition to that, you've got other tools, training, techniques, buying power. Very simple thing. If I go back to me and Chad's painting days, which was in 2003 we started the idea. 2004 we started formulating. 2005 we franchised it. So it was about 2 years from the day we kind of said we're going to do this until we sold our first franchise. I spent a lot of time negotiating a pricing program with one of our paint suppliers. And my primary focus was, could I demonstrate to a candidate that if they joined a 5-star painting franchise concept, I could save them between 30 and 40% of a price they would negotiate on their own. So I literally would, in the friend dev process, say, listen, I want you to go down to ICI Glidden. I want you to negotiate the best possible price you can get on all the paint you need for your franchise. Then come back and talk to me. And then I'm going to show you my price sheet that I get on my national pricing. And they would look at that and they'd go, you just saved me 30-40% on my buy on your products, which amounts to about 3% of my gross sales. So I just found a way to add value by just adding buying power. Those little things, I think, are things that are the responsibility of a franchisor. Give them things they couldn't get on their own.
100%. Yep. I'm with you on that one. And Chad, do you have any thoughts on Scott's hot take?
Yeah, I mean, he's right. We see it a lot. I don't think actually when you mentioned, Catherine, that home service is such a competitive industry. I think everything is competitive, but like nothing is more competitive than cookies. It seems like these days, with them popping up everywhere. So I think we have to be wise, right? I mean, home service isn't going to go away. We also know, like in this industry too, like the demand is actually only going to increase, right? Because we know that people are just becoming more and more lazy or unable to do these kind of repairs or services for themselves in an aging population. So, like we do feel, grateful and blessed that we're actually in this industry. And then it's like, how do we differentiate now? How do we help like our franchisees differentiate? It is fun right now.
Right.
We just did some massive new campaigns with some new commercials. Like a franchisee can't pay $100,000 for a commercial that can really be used for several years, that can really help them to just get their name out there. So yeah, that's what we should constantly be striving for. And if we can't do that, we have to be careful.
Yep. And if you can't do it, yeah. And I think that you nailed it when we were talking about how do you show value? How do you provide value? And even in Chad, your hot take around franchisee feedback, that to me, the life cycle of the franchisee, that feedback starts to get much louder after a couple of years of business. And it's like, okay, what have you done for me lately? Right. And so that value, proving out that value to the franchisee is more than what Scott, the launch of the business as far as, hey, I can save you money. It's how am I going to continuously improve your business and show you value for what you're contributing back to us. And that's the secret to success, right? And it's easy to say.
Yeah, you have to recognize that like there's a life cycle, right, with franchisees too. In Greg Nathan's book, I forget, I just forgot the name of the book. Profitable Partnerships, right? He talks about this, parent-child relationship with your franchisees. Yeah, like they're fully dependent on you the first couple of years, and then they become teenagers and they just know more than you, right? And then, but at some point, they're going to need to sell their business, or they're going to want to really scale. And there comes that point where they come back to you, and hopefully, right, if you've done it right, you can actually show them that there's a multiple that they can get that they couldn't get on their own because they're part of your brand. And so I do think you have to constantly be showing, you have to be educating, you have to have a good relationship with your franchisees. I mean, you want the feedback, then you also you're also coaching, you're also training throughout the process too, so that that good relationship, they do come back, they do want to ask questions, they do call their coach looking for advice and guidance along the way.
Good deal. This is a great discussion. I'm going to add in my hot take. Not sure if it'll spark as much discussion, but in line with what you guys are talking about, I think that we do a good job of hosting each other in franchising, right? We throw parties and we have conferences. But my hot take is we need to do a better job of developing the content at these conferences, and remembering that we're there for learning, and we are there for fellowship and for, networking, and that's fantastic. But the last year or so, the content at some of these franchise conferences has felt really light. And so some of the things that we're discussing, like how do I add value to my franchisees? What are some things that we should be thinking about as a brand to ensure the success of our franchisees, I feel like is missing. And part of it's, we're regurgitating content because everybody needs to learn about the best LSM strategies and, hear about, how do you do digital marketing? But to me, we're not having as meaningful as conversations as we could be if we challenged the conference people, the people putting on the conference, to really dig into some of these franchisee relations, and it's more than newsletters, right? It's that value creation.
I hate the word newsletter. Catherine, I just want to piggyback on that for a second. with some hard numbers and some information. We spent over $1 million last year in September for our annual convention. It's roughly 4 days in person. Think of how much money that is. It's a lot of money spent. And it's well in excess of what a franchisee pays to attend. I think we lose in the hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on this event. So if we're spending we spend $1 million, but then there's some sponsorship and then people pay some fees to attend, right? So you recoup some of that. We're investing $1 million, we lose hundreds of thousands.
Mhm.
And I look at that as like an investment. That means we believe that the annual convention is a means to an end, and that it will have some ROI. There'll be some bump in terms of commitment, franchisee goal setting, vision, where they could get to. And I say this often, one of the responsibilities of every franchisor is to provide community to their franchisees. One of the beautiful things of franchising is that you have peers who are going through exactly what you're going through in your business model. And there are people, we call them cohorts. In every graduating class, there are people who are kind of moving along that first year, second year, fifth year, 10th year, and so forth. And so, in my view, a couple things. One, at these conventions, your franchisees need to be organized in peer groups, that they should be meeting after the convention. This is a chance for them to get together, get to know each other. I take so much pride in seeing franchisees doing things together outside of business, vacationing together, doing little, getaways. Me and Chad went to the Dominican Republic for an event. And while we were flying down there, we saw franchisees of our 5-star painting brand it's been 10 years since we sold that business. And they were all flying down together with their peer group that they had formed 10 years ago. With the wives hanging out. Like, that to me is that is the power of franchising. You give people a community, you give them a vehicle to allow them to connect with people that are going through the same things. And then the second is, and Chad said this earlier, he mentioned how we need to have an NPS score. We need to be asking ourselves the question, are we doing our jobs? Let the franchisee tell us. Let them give you feedback on the annual convention. Let them tell you how you did. We had amazing ratings at this last convention. We had every speaker rated, every breakout rated, and we take that as now feedback as to how we can improve. And then what we did is we actually had franchisees form a committee. There's a convention committee. So we own 6 brands, and every brand had a couple of franchisees say, I'm willing to stand up and tell you and give you feedback on the program you're creating for us, so that when we do deliver something, we had the franchisee feedback all along the way. And I think that if you do those things, you can make sure that ultimately that investment you're making in annual convention. In fact, I don't know of any franchisor that makes money in their annual convention. Maybe they've done it. I don't know about it. But making sure that investment is actually well placed and is producing a return and is creating cohesion and community that you want to have happen, so that people enjoy being part of your brand.
Yeah.
I got to add one more thing, if I could, Catherine. Like you mentioned, like the content has to be there, right? That was the hot take, the content. And as much as I still think, though, that as well as we plan the intentions that we have around the content, it being the right, those side conversations that we are going to be just gems for the franchises. I mean, you talk to them, this person told me this, right? Like, Scott's right. You create the community, but you also create the community of like the top performers and those who excel in these different areas. And then you allow, because they're all together, those conversations to happen. I need to talk to so-and-so because they're really good at that. And the things that they learn from that little side conversation, because they sat together at a lunch or a dinner, maybe with their spouse or something like that. Like, people come back and say, that changed my business this year. I made $200,000 extra off of this, or I stopped spending $200,000 on this year. And we've actually heard so many, conversations like that. And so I think it's our responsibility to plan, but know that if we plan well and get them there, that those side conversations might even be better than what we plan for, to see ourselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the conference for the franchise organization is all about community, because that is, they want to learn from their peers. They are sick of hearing from the franchisor on certain topics. And so helping them share best practices and share, but like you, Scott, said, share where they are in their journey, right? That's more powerful than, I partnered with this company and it was super successful, you should do it too. But sharing the failures and the successes with their peers then gives them the energy and the bump to get back. And I think, you know, to that point, you know, the hot take that I was referencing on conferences was around the ones that we go to, right? The franchise conferences that we attend, you know, need to kind of think about how are we empowering the franchisors to bring that back to their franchisees. And I don't know, I think we're hitting a bit of a lull on the content there of challenging us to be the best, you know, bringing that value back to franchisees.
That's a good point.
Awesome. Well, that was a fun discussion. We are going to step into our question for this week. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about franchise fractionals. So scaling your franchise doesn't mean going it alone. With franchise fractionals, you have access to top tier talent you need when you need it. From finance to operations and marketing, our fractional executives have been where you want to go. Don't let the full-time commitment of executive roles hold you back. Visit Franchise Fractionals today to discover how our leaders can pave the way for your franchise's success. Because here at Dear Frannie, we're all about bringing your insights to life. Okay, so our first question for this episode is, how do I transition my brand under new leadership? As the founder, I am ready to take a step back, but the relationships I've built with the franchisees are really important to me. How do I ensure my replacement has a smooth transition? And I am super excited to talk to you guys about this because you've made this transition. I've certainly been part of a team and teams that have done this transition, and I've seen kind of all sides of it, but I've never been the founder doing it. And so I'm super interested to hear kind of how you guys navigated this, how your relationships have changed, and how you set up your successor for success. So Chad, I'll start with you.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. You know, it's slightly different sometimes what we have at 5-Star because we're a multi-brand platform. We may partner with or acquire a brand here and there. And so sometimes, like, you know, we actually help. The goal of the founder actually is to exit, right? Or perhaps we mutually agree that they should exit, right? That maybe they know they're tired, or, you know, at a different point in their life. So we're always looking for a smooth transition. And so you know, if this is an individual who's saying, hey, I'm a founder and I'm like, I need to transition for some reason, and I want to make that transition as smooth as possible. I think the most important thing is that there should be an element of time that there has to be an element of time that you need to have with the franchise base, that you need to have with the new individual coming on board. And I think there's actually a whole process around you know, how to bring that new individual in, how to vet that individual to make sure that like that individual is bringing those new things to the brand without removing the things that are so crucial to the brand. And so, like, how to put like a proper weight on that, and I think it's really important. So as the founder has to, like, you know, really navigate those kind of questions closely and make sure that it's the right individual coming in. And then I think, you know, just heavy communication with franchisees of that there's a change going on. The timing will be unique to that situation. You know, finding the right timing for that. Bringing in an FAC can be really valuable at that point as well too, to strategize how the FAC. We should use the FAC. The FAC has responsibilities in the brand, and this is a great opportunity, right, to bring like the mission, the changes, the opportunity with a large change like this to the brand, right, and to really evangelize the opportunity that's going to happen there. So use the FAC. And then, you know, bring those top performing franchisees in as well too. They may be on your FAC, they may not be, but to get like that buy-in, create expectations with those top performing franchises, because people are gonna go to them as well too. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot at stake with this, with that, you know. But I'd say if a founder is saying, hey, I love my franchisees, so I want this transition to be the best it can be, I do think they have to put that work in, right? You know, that desire for their success will maybe make them stay a little longer for a transition. Maybe make them have a few more conversations. Maybe have a few more tough conversations, right? To those initial franchisees that bought in, probably not because of the system, but because of the individual.
Right.
They put so much belief in, right? And so those conversations, they should happen. I believe strongly.
That's awesome. Scott, what are your thoughts?
I want to, I guess, come back to something Chad said earlier. As a franchisor, I think we all can agree and believe in the fact that a franchisee goes through a transition from kind of like adult, from being a baby to a child to a adolescent to a young adult and then an adult, right? And then they kind of go through those different phases. And we can all kind of understand that and look at that, go, yeah, we've experienced it, right? When a franchisee first joins, they rely on us for everything. And then at some point they become a teenager and they rebel. And at some point they realize we actually add value to their lives and that we were right in many cases, right? And so we can accept that. So if you were to think about yourself as a founder in the same way that you evolve, I evolve, and as a young father versus an older father versus a grandfather, like how do you change as a leader of a family is in the same way as how you need to change as a leader of an organization or a company. When you, as a young father, you're so involved in everything in terms of raising your child, and it's also super important. And at some point, you transition to become a grandfather where you're not involved in the day-to-day of the child's life any longer, but yet you still are highly influential. And your role changes from being an operator to being the keeper of the culture and the values and the stories that make your family who it is. And in my view, if you can accept that is part, as a founder, your role will change from being the person that does it all themselves, where you literally did all kinds of roles in the business as you started it, to now you are transitioning to a role where you now are telling the stories that created the culture of the company you've created. And you're not the one doing the things any longer. You're helping everyone remember what you've built and what it stands for. And if you can accept that in my view is probably the most important step towards transitioning from being the person that is the brand president to letting professionals come in, take on that role of operator, but then support them in that role through helping them keep the culture. And so I view my role here as the CEO of 5-Star Franchising is one of the most important things is making sure that people I let in the organization are the right fit. So I do the last interview with every hire in every brand at all of 5-Star. And that means I'm always looking to make sure, are they matching our values as an organization? Are they aligned with our mission and our purpose? Do they believe in the vision of where we're going? And I'm doing that last check to make sure that's happening. And it's supporting the operators in the brands. And so the first step is actually for yourself internally to come to grips with the fact that you need a transition. How do you do that? We could talk about for a long time tactically how do you actually do that. But I think the first step is you got to make sure you accept that you need to make that transition.
Well, hey, can I piggyback on that, Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Catherine, I cut you off again. That's 2, right?
No,
I had 3
good.
strikes and I'm out, right? So, when Scott and I sold 5-Star Painting, we had a lot of good friends. That's like those friendships were developed because we were aligned with the franchises and they had success, right? Kind of on both 2 levels. And so it was hard to say goodbye in some ways, right? And also we felt probably oh man, they're going to be so mad. Yeah. and many of these individuals came back to us and said, hey, we appreciate you selling, because someone else is going to help us more. Yeah. And that was actually really important to hear that, no, this was actually a good thing. We needed to step away. They bought into us because we were the visionaries. They bought into us because of our passion, but their brands had also grown past our passion and, maybe frugalness as well too. And so giving it to a new brand who could invest more and do more with it, we really set them up for more success. And they were really thankful for that. Just as I had to step away a little bit, from running a lot of the day-to-day at Bass Solutions, our 5-Star Bass Solutions brand, and turn that over to Dean Hartley as our brand president. It's growing. It's just flourished under his leadership. And I was too busy with other things. And, the franchisees are really grateful. And I hear that once in a while too. Dean's way better than you, Chad. And he is. He's a lot stronger at running that brand and the support that he has around that than I could do for those franchisees. So founders, it's if you're thinking about it, it's time, you're probably right.
It's probably time. Yeah.
That's a good tip. And I think, what I'm hearing is that, Chad, to what your point is around kind of communication, also communicating that why of I'm stepping back because I know someone else can take you to the next level, right? So I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to get out of the way of progress and success and trust someone else to build it better, right? Somebody who's been there, done that before, or, but then to Scott, your point though, around kind of maintaining culture and maintaining, I love the analogy that you've had with kind of the parenting piece. But I think one hole I see in it, and I'd love your feedback on it, is, at some point, and it's a bit different for your platform, right? Because you're still involved in the day-to-day, but for a founder that's ready to step out of the company, like forever.
Yeah.
And they have built this culture, and they have built a culture with their franchisees, and they've built a culture with their internal staff. And certainly I think that, to the point that you both have made around over communication to the franchisees of why we're making a transition, and then being really thoughtful of that transition. And I loved, Chad, your feedback on involving some of those franchisees, because that can be a pro and a con, right? Because sometimes when you involve franchisees, you have to listen to what their opinion is. When you ask for an opinion, somebody's going to give it to you. But at the same time, what you're doing is you're setting up a level of trust before that person even gets there by involving them in the interview process, which I really like. But in that, that person is going to come in with it, even if it's a slightly different, way of doing things, a slightly different culture. And so, how is it just one of those things where you have to let go and say, okay, this person may develop a culture that's a little bit different than what I had, but it's going to be for the benefit of the brand? Or is it something that you kind of insert yourself in and say, no, I'm going to be an advisor here, and I'm going to coach you on the culture?
Yeah, I would actually argue that if you are replacing yourself with the brand president, you need to make sure the brand president is a fit with your culture, not someone that's going to come in and transform the culture. Culture is what we value as an organization. So as an example, you could have a culture where you involve franchisees in all your decision making, and you really view yourself as a servant leader where you're about enabling and empowering them. Or you could have a culture of a sales culture. We just add lots of franchisees, and whoever fits, throw it against the wall, whatever stick works out. Those are two very different cultures. You can get to your goals in this life through all kinds of cultures, but you have to know your own, and you have to attract the person that embraces that. I would actually argue I'm not suggesting that you actually want someone to come in to change it. Tactically, and even maybe some strategic decisions will be changed because of how they view getting to the mission or the vision of the organization. They can do that, but changing the culture is not something I would suggest you do if it's right. And you got to know if it's right, if it's working or not, or you have to even know what it is. Some founders don't know yet; they have not gone through the exercise to understand what their culture even is yet. But so I'm not suggesting that. But no, you said something though, Catherine, that is important to know. You said stepping out and like exiting the brand, like being done. I think that's a very different thing. If you're at that point where you're ready to exit the business and sell the business, then in my view, you are now looking at this from a different perspective. Yeah, you need a brand president to come in and run the brand the way you see it should be run, but you need to find someone that's going to buy the brand that can actually be the right fit for the culture you created. Because there are plenty of acquirers. I am one of those. We buy businesses and home services, right? And I spend a lot of time making sure there's fit between the management team that we're acquiring and how they treat the franchisees and how they approach franchising and how we do things. I read in my undergrad, which was like 30 years ago, almost 29 years ago, that 80% of all mergers and acquisitions fail. And it's because of that, right? If you just look at an acquisition from the perspective of, well, financially this makes sense, we should acquire it, you will probably 80% of the time not make it. You need to be looking at this from the perspective of, do we have a culture that meshes and can work together? And we've done 6 deals in 3 years. And Some of those have gone way easier than others because we're more closely aligned. And whenever you don't have perfect alignment in a car, there's a little bit of friction. It happens in business as well. So having done this a few times, I recognize that, you know, if you're a founder that's selling, now you got to be thinking about who am I going to sell to and how do I find the right partner? And obviously financial elements are important. You want to make sure that you sell in a way that sets you up for your personal financial goals. But you, in my view, what's even more important, and I know Chad and I, how we approach selling 5-star painting, we literally picked our buyer. We did not run a process. We went to the buyer. We said, we view you as being the buyer that will take care of our franchisees better than we could. And then we actually asked to roll into their ownership. We said, we're handing you the business and we'll take stock in your business because that's how much we believe in your company to run this business correctly and take care of our franchisees. That's how we did it, right? Some people run a process and they take the biggest dollar and they're done. That's just not how we roll.
That's great feedback. Thank you. Well, that was a great session on that question. I think that anyone listening got a ton of feedback about what they should be looking at when they're thinking about leadership transition, and a little bonus about what they should be thinking about if they're thinking about exiting. Thank you guys so much for your time today. And if you have a question for Dear Frannie, please hit us up at hello@franchisefractionals.com. And until next time, see you later.